What is the Alexander technique? It's an incredibly difficult thing to define, or at least it historically has been. But you know what? Let's challenge that assumption. It doesn't have to be. I like to think of it as a practical philosophy of everyday living. What does that mean? Well, it is a somatic practice that helps one become aware of and ultimately change their unconscious habits of mind, of body, of even spirit to a certain extent, and become more aware of the unconscious, and then through conscious directed thought, be able to choose anew. So in a way, we could say that it is cultivating an inherent poise in the nervous system to be able to go in whatever direction you actually want to go, rather than being a slave to habit. We often hear about it in the maintenance of chronic pain, particularly back pain, but we'll also hear about it a lot for performing artists or anyone, even athletes, who has to work with their body. Because as actors, singers, instrumentalists, dancers, the body is essentially the instrument, even if you're playing another instrument. And you want to have a capacious, capable to change body or instrument, rather than always having to do the same shape or the same voice or the same shtick, because you're not going to be very versatile. You're not going to be very castable. And obviously, too, from a technical level, especially for musicians and dancers, you're not going to really be able to do what you need to do. You won't be able to hit all the notes or play the phrases with the same articulation that you need to if there's too much tension in the system. So this is where Buckminster Fuller's idea of tensegrity comes in. Alexander is really looking at where is there the appropriate amount of tension in the muscles, the fascia, the overall organization of the body. So it starts with some ergonomics. It starts with understanding where your hip joints are, that there is no such thing as the waist. We don't bend from the waist, we bend from our hips. And when this body mapping gets clearer, we're actually able, yes, just to start moving more fluidly and connectedly. We're able to alleviate a lot of pain that comes from just a lack of understanding about human physiology. But then it gets more subtle, because it's really a mind-body technique. It is a technique of looking at the unity of the mind-body rather than the separation of it into parts. And similar to meditation, where it's non-duality, it's oneness, we are in a really practical way through the body looking at the habits as the kind of manifestations of how that dualistic split and that stress of focusing too much is actually causing us to lose connection to true self and to nature. And so a typical lesson, if it's in a classical sense, will involve getting in and out of a chair for about 20 minutes with a teacher, because even though it seems very mundane, getting in and out of a chair is actually a very complex activity. It requires a unique set of different movements that have to happen in concert. And that way we can talk about the organization of the head, the neck, and the back for most optimal movement. But what's interesting is after a few lessons, as that structure starts to clear up, what becomes more evident are the habits of mind, the habits of thinking that are also constraining us or creating extra tension. And the second part of the lesson would either be working on an activity like singing or playing an instrument or tying a shoe. But more often than not, which is very popular, is doing table work, which is where the teacher can give you a different kinesthetic experience of your body by allowing your nervous system to come into a more integrated state, so that you can actually learn to move without some of those habits that have been, in essence, getting in the way of yourself. So Alexander technique is about getting out of our own way. And it's not necessarily positional, it's attitudinal. We're not shape snobs. We're not interested in always being upright. Posture is a benefit and a side effect of the Alexander technique. But, we can take any shape and be free. It's about freedom, but it isn't about a very particular manifestation of said freedom. So for example, if I'm playing Richard III in a production, he was a hunchback. I need to be hobbled. So the Alexander technique allows me to create a certain shape, but to do it in the freest way so that I don't overall hurt myself. So it's been studied to be very effective with the management of chronic pain. The National Health Service in Britain used to cover, and may still, 10 lessons, because they found that 10-lesson course was more effective for managing chronic back pain than medication and more cost effective. But it's also great for anyone who is more interested in just a mindful life, but in a very applied sense. So it's not that I'm thinking about being mindful, but I'm actually more aware of all of the ways I'm getting in the way of myself as I cook dinner or as I ride my bike, so that I can actually have more freedom and adaptability to make a different choice. Because we can be a slave to habit, or we can have infinite choices in front of us. And especially for a creative, enlightened life, we want to have as much choice as possible. So John Dewey, the American progressive philosopher and educator, was a big fan of the Alexander technique, as were a lot of interesting figures like Aldous Huxley, Bertrand Russell, Shaw, and John Dewey wrote the preface to all of Alexander's 4 major works. And he said one of my most favorite things about the technique. He said that it is a prerequisite for all other learning. So similar to how Vedic meditation makes everything better by bringing the nervous system into balance, the Alexander technique will allow you to study or acquire a skill in the freest, most capacious way possible.